Intro. The power hidden in words communication is not merely about speaking. It's about the courage to reveal your soul before another human being. You see, most people today confuse noise with connection. They talk endlessly, but they rarely communicate. They fill the silence with words that have no weight, because they fear the depth that silence might expose. But the moment you learn how to truly communicate, not to impress, not to dominate, not to win, but to understand and be understood, that is the moment your life begins to transform. The greatest revolutions in human history did not begin with weapons. They began with words. Words that pierced the heart. Words that opened the eyes of the oppressed. Words that dared to speak truth in the face of comfort. That, my friend, is the divine power of communication. It is not simply an art. It is an act of love. We live in a time where attention is cheap and empathy is expensive. Yet the essence of communication has always been about empathy, the ability to see yourself in the other, to speak not from pride, but from presence. Cornel West once said, "Never forget that justice is what love looks like in public." Communication is the same. It is what love sounds like when it becomes language. And so today, we are going to explore one of the most transformative skills a human being can ever develop: the ability to communicate truthfully, vulnerably, and powerfully. If you master this, you will not only change the way people hear you, you will change the way the world feels you. The first door, listening beyond words. First mistake we make in communication is thinking that it begins with speaking. It doesn't. It begins with listening, but not the kind of listening that most people practice. The kind that waits for a pause so they can respond. Real listening is the kind that seeks to understand before replying. When you listen deeply, you create sacred space. In that space, the other person feels seen, not judged. That space is where transformation happens. In conversations, in relationships, in nations. Because when people feel truly heard, they begin to heal. Cornel West often speaks of deep democracy, a world where every voice matters. But that world cannot exist without deep listening. It's not political. It's spiritual. The capacity to listen is the capacity to love. When you silence your ego long enough to truly hear another's pain, their hope, their confusion, you participate in their redemption. Listening is not passive. It is the most active form of compassion there is. You are saying without words your story matters. And when people sense that, they open up, they reveal, they trust. That's where transformation begins. Not with shouting, but with silence. Not with power, but with presence. You will never transform your life if you only listen to reply. You will transform it when you listen to receive, and that requires humility. It requires the courage to admit, "I don't know everything." That single sentence has more power than any speech ever written, because it opens the door to understanding. The world is full of loud voices, but the ones who truly change it are those who have learned to hear beneath the noise. They can sense pain even in a smile. They can hear love even in anger. And because they listen with empathy, their words, when they finally speak, carry the weight of truth. The second door, speaking with integrity. Once you have learned to listen deeply, the next step is to speak with integrity. Integrity is not about perfection. It's about alignment between your thoughts, your words, and your actions. When those three meet, your communication becomes electric. People can feel it before they even understand it. Cornel West reminds us that the true measure of a person is not how loud they speak truth to power, but how gently they speak truth in love. When you speak with integrity, your words are not tools of manipulation. They are reflections of your inner clarity. You no longer speak to control. You speak to connect. To speak with integrity, you must first know your truth, not the rehearsed version you present to the world, but the raw, unfiltered truth of who you are and what you stand for. When you speak from that place, even your silence has authority. In a world where people chase attention, integrity is rebellion. When you say what you mean and mean what you say, you stand out not because you're loud, but because you're real. Realness is magnetic. It cuts through the noise like light through fog. You see, communication is not about eloquence, it's about honesty. You can master all the techniques, learn the body language, use the right tone. But if your heart is not honest, your words will collapse under their own emptiness. People might hear you, but they won't feel you. Integrity gives your words roots. It gives your voice gravity. When you speak from integrity, you no longer seek validation, because truth itself becomes your validation. You begin to understand that every conversation is an opportunity not to win, but to witness, and to witness your own growth, your own courage, your own humanity. And this is the paradox of communication. When you stop trying to impress people, you start to move them. When you stop performing, you start transforming. That is the essence of Cornel West's wisdom, that the deepest kind of communication is a form of love, and the highest form of love is truth. The third door, the courage to be vulnerable. There is no transformation without vulnerability. There is no authentic communication without the courage to be seen. We live in a time where people wear masks more skillfully than they wear their true faces. They speak in rehearsed tones, hide behind curated identities, and call it confidence. But real confidence is not the absence of fear. It is the willingness to stand before others without armor, without pretense, and say, "This is who I am." Vulnerability is not weakness. It is the birthplace of strength. Cornel West reminds us that the blues, the sorrow songs of African American tradition, are not cries of defeat but of dignity. They are the voices of souls who refuse to let pain silence them. That is communication in its purest form, truth spoken through trembling lips. When you allow yourself to be vulnerable in your communication, you give others permission to be real. You become a mirror that reflects not perfection but humanity, and in that reflection, people recognize themselves. They realize they are not alone in their struggle, their confusion, or their longing. To speak vulnerably is to speak from the wound, not the mask. It is to let the cracks in your story be the light through which others can see hope. And it takes extraordinary courage to do that in a world that rewards performance more than authenticity. But here's the truth. Your vulnerability is the bridge between isolation and intimacy. When you communicate honestly about your fears, your failures, your flaws, you connect with others at the deepest level. You transform relationships from shallow exchanges into soulful encounters. The greatest communicators in history were not those who spoke perfectly, but those who spoke truthfully. They dared to let their weakness be seen, and in doing so, they revealed their strength. They didn't hide their humanity. They honored it. And that is the essence of transformation, when communication becomes communion. The fourth door. The discipline of emotional intelligence. Emotion is the heartbeat of communication, but emotional intelligence is its rhythm. Without rhythm, even the most powerful melody becomes noise. You can be brilliant in speech and yet fail to connect if you do not understand emotion, your own and others. To communicate effectively, you must learn the art of emotional awareness. To recognize anger before it becomes aggression, to sense sadness before it becomes silence, to feel tension before it becomes distance. Cornel West teaches that love is not sentimental, it's radical, and radical love requires discipline. It requires the ability to feel deeply without being destroyed by what you feel. That's emotional intelligence. It is the strength to hold emotion without letting it control you. When you speak, your tone carries more meaning than your words. People might forget what you said, but they will never forget how you made them feel. So if your words are bridges, your emotions are the hands that build them. The most transformative communicators are not those who avoid emotion. They master it. They channel their fire without burning others. They use empathy as their compass and compassion as their language. Think of the moments in your life when someone's words healed you. It wasn't because they had all the answers. It was because they felt you. Their empathy reached where logic could not. That's emotional intelligence and the invisible thread that connects hearts before minds. And to cultivate it, you must practice presence. You must learn to pause before reacting, breathe before replying, reflect before judging. That pause, that sacred pause, is where wisdom lives. It is the silence that transforms reaction into response, conflict into understanding. If you can master your emotions, you can master your communication. And if you can master your communication, you can master your destiny. Because every opportunity, every relationship, every door in life opens through a conversation. And it is emotional intelligence that decides whether that door remains open or shuts forever. The fifth door. The language of respect. Respect is the foundation of all communication that endures. Without it, even truth becomes violence. To respect someone does not mean you agree with them. It means you recognize their humanity, even when you cannot recognize their logic. Cornel West often reminds us that justice begins when we treat people not as problems to be solved, but as souls to be understood. Respect in communication is not about politeness. It's about presence. It is the ability to see the sacred in the other person, even in disagreement. In a divided world, this is revolutionary. When you communicate with respect, you disarm the ego, both yours and theirs. You invite dialogue instead of debate, understanding instead of victory. You begin to see that every conversation is an opportunity, not to prove your point, but to expand your perspective. Respect transforms communication from transaction to transformation. It turns arguments into learning. It turns strangers into allies. It turns pain into possibility. To speak with respect is to speak with humility. It is to realize that every person you meet knows something you don't. Every voice carries a story you haven't lived. And when you listen with that awareness, you grow, not just in knowledge, but in wisdom. You cannot communicate with depth if you do not respect difference. You cannot inspire others if you do not honor their dignity. The language of respect is not taught, and it is lived. It's in your tone, your patience, your willingness to understand before you judge. In the end, respect is not about being right. It's about being real, because being real requires courage. The courage to stand in your truth without stepping on someone else's. That is the highest form of communication. That is how transformation begins, not through domination, but through dignity. And when you live by this principle, your words begin to carry healing instead of harm, connection instead of division. You stop communicating just to be heard, and start communicating to make others feel seen. The sixth door. The responsibility of truth. There comes a moment in every seeker's journey when they realize that communication is not only a gift, it is a responsibility. Words carry weight. Every syllable you release has the potential to heal or to harm, to liberate or to chain, to uplift or to destroy. The power of communication demands the maturity of truth. Truth is not convenience dressed as conviction. It is not a weapon to win arguments or a banner to boast wisdom. Truth, as Cornel West reminds us, is a way of life. It is not merely what you speak. It is how you live. It is your willingness to align your actions with your declarations. To communicate truthfully, you must first be willing to face yourself. You cannot speak truth to the world if you are still lying to your own reflection. The hardest conversations are often the ones we have within, the dialogue between who we are and who we pretend to be. That is where real transformation begins. Truth requires courage because it often costs comfort. It demands that you speak even when silence would protect you. It asks you to stand firm when falsehoods would reward you. But there is a freedom that only truth can give, the kind that no approval, no applause, no temporary gain can replace. In a world addicted to image, truth-tellers are often seen as disruptors. But remember this: every great movement for human progress was led by those who dared to speak truth even when the crowd wanted silence. They knew that authentic communication is not about being liked. It's about being real. When your words are rooted in truth, they gain a resonance that no performance can imitate. People might disagree with you, but they will respect you, because truth has a vibration that even lies can't silence. Cornel West often speaks of being maladjusted to injustice. To communicate truthfully is to be maladjusted to hypocrisy. It means refusing to speak in the language of comfort when conscience calls you higher. It means refusing to water down your convictions for the sake of applause. Truth, my friend, is not easy. But it is the only foundation upon which authentic communication and authentic living can stand. Everything else is a performance. And when you learn to speak truth with love, your words stop being mere expressions. They become instruments of awakening. They shake hearts, they ignite minds, they move generations. That is the responsibility of communication, to use words not just to inform, but to transform. The seventh door. The legacy of connection. Every conversation you have is a thread in the tapestry of humanity. Every word you speak weaves something into another soul. Whether you realize it or not, you are leaving a legacy through your communication, a legacy of division or a legacy of connection. Cornel West says, "You can't lead the people if you don't love the people." And love, at its core, is the highest form of communication. It transcends grammar, language, and status. It is the tone that says you matter. To transform your life through communication, you must stop treating it as a transaction and start treating it as an act of creation. Every time you speak, you are creating energy, shaping perception, planting emotion. Are you planting fear or are you planting faith? Are you spreading despair or are you sowing hope? The legacy of communication is built not in moments of public greatness, but in the small private exchanges where kindness overcomes pride, where patience replaces judgment, where understanding defeats arrogance. That's where transformation begins, in how you speak to the waiter, to your child, to your colleague, to yourself. Real communication is not measured by how many people listen to you, but by how many people feel changed after they do. That is what the great communicators of history understood. Jesus, Socrates, Baldwin West, and they spoke not to be admired, but to awaken something ancient in the human heart. You must ask yourself, what will my words leave behind? When people remember your voice, will they recall the sharpness of your wit or the warmth of your wisdom? Will your speech echo as noise or as nourishment? If you use your words to build, you will always be remembered as a creator. If you use them to heal, you will always be remembered as a teacher. But if you use them to love, you will be remembered as a light. Communication is the language of eternity. Long after your face is forgotten, your words will remain. In the minds you touched, in the hearts you lifted, in the lives you changed. That is your true legacy, the call to speak light. So as we come to the close of this reflection, remember this. The power to transform your life does not lie in learning to speak louder. It lies in learning to speak truer. Learn to listen deeply. Speak with integrity. Dare to be vulnerable. Practice emotional intelligence. Honor every soul with respect. Defend truth with courage. And build connections that outlast time itself. Cornel West once said, "To live is to wrestle with despair, yet never allow despair to have the last word." The same is true of communication. Every time you choose to speak with compassion instead of contempt, you silence despair. Every time you choose honesty over manipulation, you silence despair. Every time you choose understanding over ego, you silence despair. That is the transformation we seek. Not a change in vocabulary, but a change in consciousness. Not the art of speaking better, but the art of being better. When communication becomes an expression of love, love for truth, love for humanity, love for life itself, then every conversation becomes sacred. You are no longer just talking. You are participating in the evolution of the human spirit. So speak with intention, listen with compassion, and live your words with courage, because in the end the greatest communication skill is not found in what you say, but in how you love. That is how communication transforms your life, not by making you heard, but by making you whole.